There's a story of a man who left his house, his young children at home, to go to the bar. He was struggling with alcohol and felt this urge, and so he made his way walking there, planning on not being able to drive back. And so he started walking there, and through the snow, as it was during a winter season. He's walking through the snow, and he gets to the entrance of the bar, and he hears this faint voice calling out and saying, "Daddy, Daddy." And he turns around at the entrance to the bar, and he sees his son following him. And almost to the entrance of the bar, he says, "Son, what are you doing here? You need to be home. Why are you here?" And that man that looks at his son, and his son with a tear in his eyes looks back up at his dad, and he says this, "Dad, I was only following in your footsteps." You see, that boy saw the tracks in the snow, and he was placing his foot where his daddy's foot stepped. And as he would follow footprint after footprint after footprint, he was led to where his father was. The father realized the implications of the importance of realizing where he goes, his family will follow. And the steps that he takes, his children will take. He realized the implications of that. And so that day, the father and son went home together. Something that's so important for every person to realize today is this: the path that we walk is a path being paved for someone else to follow. One person said that the road to heaven is a narrow road. It's from the Bible. But they went on to say, but if more people walked it, it would be a wider road. You see, the more a path is traveled, the more a path is made. And when we as Christians walk in a direction and we allow our lives to go that way, we are going to find that that is a path being paved, and someone else will find that road and they will follow us on it. And especially today on Father's Day, if you are a father here today, what you do, the implication is that your family will follow in your footsteps. Our children will follow. Others will follow. But it's not limited to dads. You see, because God has called each of us to be leaders. He's called each of us to be an example that people could follow. And that's what we see in our story today. We see a dad, a father, a man named Abraham, who later would become known as Father Abraham because he fathered the nation of Israel. Also is known as the father of faith. And we see Abraham, who is known as the father of faith, and God used in such passionate and dynamic ways. But we see Abraham, he, although the father of faith, wasn't always faithful to the Lord. Let's look at Genesis chapter 20 together. It says this: Abraham moved south to the Negev and lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur. And then he moved on to a place called Gerar. Now, Gerar was a place of Philistine territory, a pagan land. And while living there as a foreigner, verse 2 says, Abraham introduced his wife Sarah by saying, "She is my sister." Now, Abraham goes to a place maybe he shouldn't have been. And while he's there, he tells everybody that his wife is his sister. Now, it's not because Abraham wanted to see what other ladies were on the market in this new location. So this is my sister, I'm single, ready to mingle. No, it wasn't because of that. But in that day, if you went to a new place and you didn't have a lot of protection and you went to a new community where everybody was friends together and they thought your wife was beautiful, she was a good-looking woman, then what they would do is they would just kill you and take her. And so Abraham, in order to save his own neck, he tells everybody that she's my sister. Imagine that in today's day. Sweetheart, I love you. You're a wonderful wife, but you know what? My life is way more important than our marriage. You definitely are not worth fighting for. And so if anybody wants you, I'm just going to let them take you. Okay, sweetheart? I mean, could you imagine? And you know what Sarah does? Okay, honey. And she goes along with it instead of saying, "You stupid, maybe what would be more appropriate. But Sarah, Abraham tells her, hey, any new place that we go, we're going to tell everybody you're my sister to protect my own neck. Yeah, you might have to be taken away. I might never see you again, but that's okay because I'm going to be alive. I mean, could you imagine? That's what Abraham does. The father of faith. Faith in God that God will protect me. No. Takes matters into his own hands. So he introduces his wife saying that she's my sister. So the King Abimelech of Gerar, sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. The word got out on how beautiful Sarah was. And the king, realizing this new beautiful woman, decides that I want to take that woman to be my wife. But that night, God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, you are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married. Now, that word dead actually means omnipotent, sexually dead, without a drive, without being able to function as a man. God appears to him and says, you are no longer going to be a man in the way that you've been a man before. You are now physically, sexually dead. He says, oh no, we got to do something about this. And so Abimelech had not slept with her yet. So he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Didn't Abraham tell me she's my sister? And she herself said, yes, he is my brother. I acted in complete innocence. My hands are clean. In other words, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. And I haven't done anything yet. So don't blame me. And so in the dream, God responded, yes, I know you're innocent. That is why I kept you from sinning against me and why I did not let you touch her. Now return the woman to her husband, and he will pray for you, for he is a prophet. Then you will live. But if you don't return her to him, you can be sure that you and all your people will die. And so, verse 8, Abimelech got up early the next morning. You better believe he's not going to waste any time. We got to fix this problem right away. And so he got up early the next morning and quickly called all of his servants together. And when he told them what had happened, his men were terrified because it wouldn't only affect Abimelech, it would affect everybody. The entire nation would die. And so all the men said, oh no, we got to do something about this. And so he told the men, and the men were terrified. Then verse 9, Abimelech called for Abraham. What have you done to us? He demanded. What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing? You get the point? Abraham failed so much so that a pagan king would be reprimanding the father of faith, who is a prophet. God says he's a prophet. Then why is he lying? Why is he giving me his wife and saying she's my sister? You get the point. You messed up big time, Abraham. And Abraham replied, well, I thought this is a godless place. Oh, now he goes with some excuses. Let me tell you my reasoning behind this. No, you are wrong, Abraham. You are an idiot. As we say in German, Dummkopf, du bist verrückt. That means dumbhead, you are crazy. You see, Abraham made a big mistake. Abraham messed up, but now here comes the excuses. When we make a mistake, it's so important that we just would own up to what we've done versus giving all the reasons why we did it in the first place. This is a godless place. And they will want my wife and will want to kill me. And she really is my sister, for we both have the same father but different mothers. And I married her. You see, in that day, before the law of Moses, there wasn't the rules of interfamily marriage. You see, Adam and Eve had children. The only choice that they would have to marry is their brother or sister. Now, they were fruitful and multiplied. Adam and Eve, through the 900 and some years of their life, would have had several hundred children. Some wouldn't even know each other. So it was not as weird as we would think it today. But then God instituted the law, which prevented things like that. But this is early in the beginning of the world, and that was a normal custom, and it was his half-sister, and so he married her. So he was telling a half-truth, a half-sister, half-truth sort of thing. You see, he's not telling the full truth, and he's lying. Now he's trying to make excuses about his white lie and So he says in verse 13, when God called me to leave my father's home and to travel from place to place, I told her, do me a favor, wherever we go, tell the people that I am your brother. Hey, would you do me this one favor? Now, there's certain favors, ladies, that you should say no to. This would be one of them. Something that we as you as ladies should not agree to, and we as married couples should not do, is when your husband tells you to do something wrong. You see, as a wife, it's important to be submissive unto your husband as unto the Lord. It's not because your husband always deserves it or not. There's times that your husband absolutely does not deserve it. But it's because you are submitted unto the Lord in your life and you respect the Lord. And so you, be out of your love and respect and submission unto the Lord, you will submit to your husband. But there are times biblically when wives are not to submit to their husbands, and that's when they are asking of their wives to do something that is biblically wrong. But before you ladies go and say, no, I'm not going to do it, you better make sure that it is wrong before the Lord, that you get godly counsel and you seek God in His Word. Because if it's just a disagreement or something that you don't agree with and are looking from some obscure verse to prove your case, listen, it's rebellion to God. Likewise, husbands are ought to love their wives as Christ loved the church. How did Christ love the church? Romans 5:8, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Men, that means you are to love your wives unconditionally, agape love. That is when your wife does not deserve it. It's not dependent upon what she does or doesn't do. It's a love that you ought to show because of the love that Christ has shown you. And so Abraham was not showing Sarah that love. And Sarah was, in a sense, being wrong, although God still would honor her, although she went along with a sinful plan. And so then, verse 14, Abimelech hears his excuse and took some of his sheep and goats and cattle and male and female servants, and he presented them to Abraham. He also returned his wife Sarah to him. Then Abimelech said, look over my land and choose any place where you would like to live. And he said to Sarah, look, I am giving you your brother 1,000 pieces of silver in the presence of all these witnesses. This is to compensate you for any wrong I may have done to you. This will settle any claim against me, and your reputation is cleared. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants so they could have children. For the Lord had caused all the women to be infertile because of what happened with Abraham's wife, Sarah. Now, Abraham, he messed up bad. He failed. He fell short. Now, years go on. Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac was that son that was promised to Abraham, a son that he loved, his only son. And so Abraham now has a son, Isaac. And we fast forward to Genesis chapter 26. This is years later now. Years later now we see Isaac, for the same reason Abraham left, because there was a famine, and because of the difficulty, Abraham left to a new place. Now watch what we see Isaac do. A severe famine, says chapter 26, verse 1, now struck the land as it happened before in Abraham's time. So Isaac moved to Gerar, where Abimelech, king of the Philistines, lived. Look where Isaac goes. Isaac, like his father, during a famine, goes to the exact same place Dad did. Abraham went to Gerar. Isaac follows in his footsteps. And Isaac goes, and we see Isaac go, and so Isaac moved to Gerar, where Abimelech, king of the Philistines, lived. Now, we just read about Abimelech. This is Abimelech's son. Abimelech was a dynastic name of the Philistine people. So if you were king, you would take on that name, kind of like Caesar. There's a lot of different Caesars. So this is Abimelech too, if you will. And now Isaac, the son of Abraham, and Abimelech, the son of the first Abimelech, now are meeting together. Their dads met, they had this truth, they had this pact. Now the sons are meeting for the first time. Skip down to verse 7. When the men who lived there asked Isaac about his wife, Rebekah. Now remember, Rebekah was the woman that Isaac loved, he cared about. Rebekah was a godly woman. He said, she is my sister. Wrong! He was afraid to say, she is my wife. He thought, they will kill me and get her because she is so beautiful. So now, Isaac, he goes where his dad goes. Now he uses the same vocabulary. He uses the same speech. He's talking like his dad talked. He says, she's my sister. Does that ring a bell? We just read about it. And now Isaac goes to Abimelech and does the same thing that Abraham did. Same location, the exact same thing in the same exact way. So, Isaac says, hey, I love you, you're beautiful, and because you're so beautiful, baby, all these guys are going to love you, they're going to want you, and I'm okay with that. They're going to have you because I want to live. And so I love you, baby, but not that much. I love myself way, way more. And so Isaac does the same thing. And so he offers his wife, yeah, she's not my wife, she's my sister. And no one yet had taken her as their wife. But notice what happens in the next verse. Sometime later, the word got around about this beautiful woman that came into town. It's kind of like when you're in school and a girl transfers in and she's really pretty and you're like, everybody knows about the new girl. Now they know about the new girl. They knew about Rebekah. And sometime later, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out his window and saw Isaac caressing Rebekah. I love how the King James Version puts it. If you have a King James Bible, it says, and the king saw Isaac sporting with Rebekah. You can get the idea of what they were doing. They were being physical with each other. They were tucked away in a place they thought no one could see, and they were messing around. And now the king, which the king would always have his castle over the land, being able to look over the land. And so now the king sees Isaac messing around with his sister. Weird. I never looked at my sister like that. Never touched my sister like that. That's not his sister. And so King Abimelech calls Isaac back in. And immediately Abimelech called for Isaac, verse 9, and exclaimed, she's obviously your wife. Why did you say she's my sister? The same thing that his dad asked Abraham. Because, I was afraid someone would kill me to get her from me, Isaac replied. You see, Isaac said, sweetheart, someone might kill me to take you, so basically you're just my sister. You're not worth fighting for. I'll take the back seat. It's interesting, we might think you idiot in church today when it comes to Isaac and Rebekah. But how many times do we not fight for our marriages when things get difficult? We fight in our marriages instead of fighting for our marriages. You see, the Bible says we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And that is any time that we get in a fight and we are fighting against flesh and blood, that is against a person, a physical person. Anytime we're in an argument or a fight with somebody, we are never fighting the right fight. Because we don't fight against flesh and blood. We have to realize that there's principalities and powers. There's a spiritual realm that we are actually fighting against. And if we are always swinging at the wrong person, whether it's verbal blows or physical tussles, whatever it may be, if we fight with the wrong person, if we fight against flesh and blood, we will never be able to knock the enemy out of our marriages. We will never be able to knock the enemy out of our families. We'll never be able to knock the enemy out of the situations because we're swinging at the wrong person. Listen, the enemy will throw blows, blind shots, left and right. But listen, we can fire back. But if we fire back to the person that is across from us, we are always firing back at the wrong person. Isaac, it wasn't worth for him to fight for his marriage. Abraham would say to his wife, listen, sweetheart, they're going to want you, they can have you. You really aren't worth fighting for. I'm not going to want to deal with any of this. It would be easier just to give you up. What does Isaac do? Well, Dad didn't fight for his marriage. I didn't see Dad fight for his marriage. I heard about the stories. Yeah, Mom told me. Mom told me what Dad did twice. Because it wasn't only in Genesis chapter 20 that Abraham did this to Sarah. He also did it when they went to Egypt. They went to Egypt and Dad did the same thing again. Mom told me what Dad did. Messed up big time. I heard about it. So what does Isaac do? Well, I'm just going to do what Dad did. This is what Dad did, and he got away with it. I'm just going to do what I saw and heard my dad do. And Isaac would follow in his dad's footsteps. He wasn't willing to die for his wife. And you might say, well, I'll be willing to die for my wife. But are you on a daily basis? You see, Ephesians chapter 5, we talked about it earlier. God calls the husbands to love their wives as Christ loves the church. Christ loved the church enough to die for his bride. He laid down his life in order to bring the bride, the church, closer to him. And so that's what Christ has done for us. And so too, men, that's what we are to do. We are to lay down our own lives in order to bring our bride closer to God. And that might mean dying to self, our selfish ambitions, our self-desires, our self-satisfaction, our self-motivations, our goals, our dreams, our aspirations, is putting those things to death. If any of those things would keep our wives from coming closer to the Lord. You see, when two become one, it's no longer about what I want or what's best for me. It's what's best for us. And that's hard to do. I'm doing several couples pre-marriage counseling sessions right now. I have several weddings this summer, and so I'm meeting with actually 3 couples at the same time, different times, but through the same season right now. And one thing that I always share with people, I say, you want to find out how selfish you are? Get married. Because when you get married, you realize my entire life, I was just living for myself. I was born that way. When you were born, you start crying. I want food. Before babies talk, Brenton, he's over a year, still doesn't talk because he likes to scream. Just looks at you. What do you want? This over here. You grab it. He loves to yell, and that's what babies do. Their diapers are dirty. What do? They scream. So selfish of them. Let me sleep through the night. Selfish babies. And then the kids grew up, a few years go by. Guess what changes? Nothing. And then they become 18, 19, 20. They're adults now. And still nothing changes. And we go throughout our whole lives, and then you meet somebody, you're a young adult, maybe not a young adult, but you meet somebody, they're the one. You haven't yet had a conversation with them, but you believe by faith that they're the one. And so you have that conversation with them, you guys are dating, you guys fall in love, everything's going great, you get married, and then it's like, no, that doesn't work with me anymore. You see, we've been selfish our whole lives, whatever we want, living for ourselves and what we desire for our own lives. But then when you 2 lives become one life and 2 flesh become one flesh, it's no longer about what's best for me or what's best, what I want. It's what's best for us. And you see, Abraham wasn't willing to lay down his life. Isaac wasn't willing to lay down his life. But may that not be true for you, men. May that not be said of you that you aren't willing to lay down your own life to fight for your marriage. You see, we need to lay down our lives, die to ourselves. You see, understanding what takes place in marriage, what the Bible talks about. You see, Abraham and his wife, you could say they were separated. You could say that they were divorced in a lot of ways, but they were separated. He gave his wife to another woman. Oh, she's my sister, she's gone. You could say that they had a rift in their marriage. And now you see that same thing taking place in Isaac's life. It's interesting. according to Nicholas Wolfginger, in understanding the divorce cycle, the risk of divorce is 50% higher when one spouse comes from parents who have been divorced. 50% higher chance of divorce in your marriage if one of your parents were divorced in that marriage. And then it goes to say it's 200% higher when both people in that marriage have parents that have been divorced. Because why? Well, it's what I saw Dad do. It's what Mom did. It's what my examples were to me. Now, that does not mean that it has to be true for you, nor does it mean if you've been divorced that God can't heal, that God can't restore, and still use you as an example. But the statistics are there. When you see what Mom did, what Dad did, when you see what your examples did, it has an impact on your life. And parents, know this. Whether you have adult children or young children, know this today. What you do has an impact on their lives as they follow in your footsteps. Whether you like it or not, whether you tell them that you made mistakes, don't do what I did, still you've done it. Now that doesn't mean there's condemnation from the past, because those who are in Christ Jesus, there is therefore now no condemnation. That means the past failures, the past mistakes, the past shortcomings, God can work all those things together for good to use those things. But the reality today for us all to realize is that we have great influence in people's lives that are watching us, whether we realize it or not. Your example of what you do has a major impact on those around you, but especially those that are underneath you, your children. So Abimelech, he responds and says in verse 10, "How could you do this to us?" Same thing his dad said. Abimelech exclaimed, "One of my people might have easily have taken your wife and slept with her, and you would have made us guilty of a great sin." Then Abimelech issued a public proclamation: "Anyone who touches this man or his wife will be put to death." Why would Abimelech go to such great lengths to see Isaac and his wife protected, to make a decree as the king to protect an individual couple? Because he knew what happened to his dad. When his dad took Sarah, the entire nation became infertile. That God killed men sexually. And Abimelech says, "I heard about what took place then. It's not going to happen again. You touch her, you're dead. I'll kill you myself." And so Abimelech issues this decree because he did not want history to repeat itself. Notice there's two men in our story, Abimelech and Isaac. One repeated history, and one didn't want history to repeat itself. One was doing as they saw their dad do. Isaac saw what his dad did and followed in his footsteps. The other wanted to make sure what happened to his dad didn't happen to him. Two men in our story, two sons. Both could learn from their dads. Isaac knew his dad's story. Abraham had blown it twice in the same way. Now Isaac we see at the same spot that his dad went to. Remember what his dad did and does the exact same thing and even speaks the way his dad spoke. May every father be challenged here today on this Father's Day. May we be reminded, exhorted, and encouraged today, knowing that our children will go where we go and do what we do and talk the way that we talk and say what we say. They will follow us in our footsteps. It's such an important reminder for us to realize, because the way that we live has great influence on people's lives. You might say, well, I can handle it. I'm a man, and, I didn't grow up a Christian, so I grew up doing these things. Now that I am a Christian, I still can do some of those things as I can handle it. I can handle my liquor, and I won't get drunk, and I'll do this, and I'll do that. And I can handle it. Good for you, macho man. But can your kids? Will your kids be raised in a home that they're taught it's okay to do this or it's okay to do that as long as you can handle it? I've counseled so many fathers who have found out that their child thrown in jail because of drunk driving. I've had a father that lost a child because he crashed drunk driving. I've talked to so many dads that have said, I wish I would have never told my kids, it's okay. I wish I would have never been that example to say, I can handle it, so I guess you just need to learn how to handle it. You might say, well, listen, I can go to those movies. I'm an adult. Yeah, I can have those movies in the home. We don't let the kids watch them, but I'll have them. And, they know those are daddy's movies or mom's and, the adult movies. And they know. What's it saying to your kids? Well, I'm a man. I'm an adult. No, you're stupid. We have to be those that would say, you know what? If it's not okay, if I don't want someone following me to do this, I better not be doing it. Where we could say, follow in my footsteps. My hope and desire for each of you, not only for dads, for moms, but as for Christians here today, for believers in Christ, that we would live our lives in such a way where you choose to go, what you choose to do, no matter what you say to your children, don't do this, do as I say, not as I do. I pray that wouldn't be the case for us, but that we could say, do as I do, and do as I say. You see, a lot of times we say, don't do what I do, just do what I say. Just do what I say, just do what I say. But listen, parents, actions speak louder than words. Actions always speak louder than words. And it doesn't matter what you say. From a young age, I've realized that even my babies, they watch what we do. They're sponges, they pick up everything. But that does not stop. As they grow older, they feel that it's more justified because it's what dad did. It's what mom does. It's what my friend does. And justify it that way. Listen, you walk righteously, you walk circumspectly, and that will be the example that will be a great help to all those that look at your life. You walk in compromise, and that's usually where those that are following you will end up. So the question today for you is not, are you being an example? Because you all are an example whether you realize it or not. The question for you today is, what example are you being? Are you one that people can follow? Are you one that your kids can follow? You see, Paul the apostle puts it this way, and you might say today, I don't know if I need to be an example. They don't need to follow me. Follow Christ. Look to God. Don't look to me. I fall short. And that is true. We ought to encourage people to look to Jesus Christ. But the fact of the matter is, we ought to live our lives in such a way as Paul the apostle did, where he could say this, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. So you see, to be a Christian, it means to be an imitator of Jesus. A Christian, literally the word defined, means imitator of Christ or mini me. It means I am like Christ. I'm going to walk like him. I'm going to talk like him. I'm going to act like him. I'm going to be an imitation of him. And so that when you say I am a Christian, what you are saying is you can look at my life, and through looking at my life, you can see Jesus. Is that true for all of us? I don't know about you, but that was super sobering and convicting to me. As I would realize that, can people look at my life? And if they look at my life and watch my life, the way that I live, the way that I talk, the way that I act, will they know Jesus more, or will they want to not know Jesus more? We ought to live our lives like Paul did, where we are imitators of Christ, and we can say, hey, follow me as I follow Christ. Another translation puts that same verse that way. Follow me as I follow Christ. In other words, follow in my footsteps. Step where I step. Walk where I walk. Do as I do, and you'll be okay. Paul could say that because his life was so surrendered to Jesus Christ. Paul surrendered his life so fully where he could say, don't just do as I say, but do as I do. If everyone at Regenerate Church did as you do, what type of church would this be? If everybody did exactly what you do, where would our church be? If everyone prayed with the same fervency that you pray, how much prayer would take place at our church? If everyone gave financially just like you gave, just as much as you did, would we continue to be able to do all that we do as a church and continue to advance and do more for God? Or would we have to close our doors? If everybody in this church came to church just as faithfully as you do, If everyone was a follower of you, would we have more people coming to church on a regular basis hungry for God's word? Or would we see more people come when it was convenient for them? You see, if everyone does just what you do, what would this church look like? If everyone in your family did what you do, what would your family look like? We ought to be living our lives in such a way where we can say, do as I do, and know that things will be better, not worse. And especially men, we are called to be leaders. On this Father's Day, I want to challenge you to be the men that God has called you to be. You are called to be examples, to lead your family, to lead your wife, to spend time with her in the Word, to pray with her, to lead your children closer to the Lord. Listen, it's not our kids' responsibility, although they do such a great job with your kids, and we're so thankful, aren't we, for our kids' ministry, doing such an amazing job with all of our children. But they have your kids about an hour and a half once a week. They can't accomplish that. It's your job. That's just the icing on the cake. RSM with your students, your junior high and high school students, they can't do it. Although they'll be encouraged on it, it's just the icing on the cake. Parents, it's your role. Families, it's your role. Big brothers, big sisters, it's your role. To encourage your family, to encourage your friends, to be in examples where people can follow you. You might say, though, today, you might find yourself in one of two categories on this Father's Day. You might find yourself in this first category where you would say, I didn't or currently don't have a dad. Or my dad was gone. Or my dad wasn't a good example. Or my dad wasn't there for me like he should have been. Maybe for you today on Father's Day, you think, if only I had a dad. If only my dad would have been there, or if only I had a godly example. But this Father's Day, I realized I didn't, or I don't. And maybe for some of you, that Father's Day is a hard day because it causes you to grieve. I never had that example. I wish my dad would have been there, but he wasn't. Listen, Jesus in Isaiah is described as the Messiah, the coming King, the everlasting Father. And when you feel like dad wasn't there, know this, that Jesus Christ is always there, has always been there, and will always be there for you. And whenever you need to know what to do, you can look to that Father, Jesus Christ, as the perfect example, the one who was without sin, who became sin, laying his life down. You can look to Jesus in every situation of your life and know what dad you ought to be. You can know the man that God's called you to be, the woman that God's called you to be, because you look to Jesus Christ. And when you feel like no one was there for you, you can know that God will always be there for you. And so more than celebrating just our earthly father today, Father's Day ought to be the day we come to church the most as we celebrate our heavenly Father and are thankful for him in our lives. You see, we ought to be following in that Father's footsteps. The title of my message today is Follow in His Footsteps. And although that can mean to follow in His footsteps, you look to people to follow, it primarily means follow in Jesus' footsteps. Because wherever he's walked, if you walk, wherever he goes, you go, you know you'll be exactly where God wants you to be. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21 says this, leaving us as an example that you should follow in his steps. God has left us, believers on earth, to be an example to the world. But in order to be the example to the world, we need to follow in Jesus' footsteps to be imitators of God. You have a dad. As we saw in the video earlier, you have a hero. Dad is your hero. Now listen to how a hero is defined. A person who acts beyond their duty to help or save others, often sacrificing him or herself in the process. A hero, one that goes beyond their duty, often sacrificing themselves. It's exactly what God has done for you. God went beyond his duty to save you. He came down, lowered himself below the angels, sacrificing himself in the process. It's God who is our hero. And if God is our hero, then we ought to want to be like him. Just like kids, I want to be like my hero. I want to be like Mike. For those kids growing up in the 90s, 80s, that was our mantra. I ate Wheaties. I hated Wheaties. But I ate Wheaties because, well, MJ was on the box. And MJ ate Wheaties. And if I ate my Wheaties, well, I would be in the NBA too. Didn't quite happen. But I still ate boxes of Wheaties because I want to be like Mike, my hero. Others had other heroes, superheroes. And I want to be like my superhero. Well, listen, if we as Christians find our hero who's gone beyond his duty, sacrificing himself, it's God, we ought to say in my heart, I desire to be like my hero. And that's the very instruction that Paul gives in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1. Therefore, be imitators of God as dear children. Be an imitator of God, a follower of God. Be an imitator. You see, the Greek word for an imitator is mimetes. It's where we get our word mimic. When we hear the word mimic, we normally think of something that's negative, a brother or sister, usually a little brother or sister, mimicking me. Stop mimicking me. Stop mimicking me. Stop mimicking me. Stop mimicking me. We often think of that because most of us has had that. I was that. But as you grow older, you learn that the greatest form of flattery is imitation. When you realize when someone is mimicking you, it's not a negative thing to God. It's exactly what he wants us to do. What he says, we say, and he loves it. Where God went, we go. He loves that. Follow your real hero. And so if you're in that first category today on this Father's Day and you would say, you know what, I didn't have a father. Well, know this, you do have a father. You just have to give your life to him and follow him. And then maybe you're in a second category. You might say, well, not only did I not know a dad, but you might say, I'm not or haven't been the best dad. For you who are fathers today, you say, Pastor, thanks a lot, I feel like I have been Abraham, a big dummy, and Isaac, and I haven't fought for my marriage, and I haven't been the best example to my kids, and I've failed, and I've fallen short. And I thought you guys said if I come on Father's Day, I'd feel encouraged, and now I just feel worse. Because I looked to the life of Jesus, who is perfect, and realized I'm not that. Well, that's a good step to realize that. But you see, not only do we feel bad because we realize we're not Jesus, but oftentimes after coming up short, we think, why even bother anymore? Why even keep trying? I'm never going to be as good as God. But God isn't interested in us becoming him. He's interested in us growing in the process. Listen, we will never arrive to the point where we are, well, I'm perfect. Look at me, I'm great. Look how great I am. I hope you never think you get to that point either. But God is interested in the process where we day by day are being saved, developed, becoming more like him. Along this journey, the change that God is interested in, becoming more like him, cannot be done by us. It's only something that can be done by him. Philippians 2:13 puts it this way, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to do for his good pleasure. For it is God who works in you. This is a great encouragement to anyone who has ever failed trying. Perhaps another translation will help us get the full picture. Listen to how the NLT puts Philippians 2:13. For God is working in you and giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. What God calls you to do, men, what God calls you to do, women, listen, he not only will place that desire in your heart as you surrender your life to him to want to do what's right, but he will give you the power to accomplish what he's called you to do. Although Father Abraham failed, although Isaac fell short, listen, if you've ever felt like you failed, fallen short, and now because of my failures, I feel like, I've set my kids up to fail, and those that were following me, they shouldn't have been or couldn't have been following me. Know this, for anyone that might feel discouraged, know this. Although Abraham failed, although Isaac failed, God even used their failings to bring about blessings in both of their lives. In Abraham's story, Although what Abraham did was wrong, God used what the enemy intended to destroy in their marriage for good. And he was blessed with livestock and sheep and finances and land. God blessed him abundantly because even when we are faithless, God is still faithful. And God will be faithful even when we weren't faithful, even when we were faithless and weren't the good example and weren't doing what we ought to be doing. God is still faithful to do what he needs to do within our families. And he'll bring about blessings still when we turn back to him. It was when Abraham reconciled is when God blessed him. Same with Isaac. Isaac was in fear of his lives and his wife's life. And so he was worried that they didn't have protection for their lives, that someone would kill them. And so what does Isaac do? He lies. But when there's reconciliation, God gives Isaac the protection for his marriage that they needed. That they were protected by the king, said, no one ever will touch you guys. You're under my wing now. And so each time that we see people throughout the Bible be faithless, we see God, when they would turn back to God, become faithful and always remain faithful no matter how faithless we've been. I think of Abraham. Abraham, although known as the father of faith so many times, fell short and failed. Abraham, even in waiting for his son Isaac, God promises him a son, but he's waiting decade after decade, no son. So Sarah, his wife, says, well, why don't you just take my Egyptian handmaiden? She's young, she's pretty. Why don't you go sleep with her and have a baby? And maybe God's promise to a son wasn't for us, but maybe it's just for you, and you need to go have a son with somebody else. So what does Abraham do? He says to his wife, you want me to go and sleep with another woman? Okay. And he goes and he sleeps with Hagar. And he has a son named Ishmael. Ishmael, who would battle and fight against the son that God promised to him, Isaac, for the rest of their lives and throughout all of history, because it was a work of the flesh. And even when he was faithless and not waiting for the faithfulness of God to come through on the promise, watch how God's so faithful. I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but Abraham has a son Isaac, Isaac Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. One of them is Joseph, the favorite. The other brothers hate Joseph. They throw Joseph in a pit. One of the brothers comes and says, you know what? Let's not kill Joseph so we don't have his blood on our hands. Let's just sell him into slavery so we can wash our hands clean from it. They sell him into slavery, and those slave traders take Joseph and they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael. The Ishmaelites buy Joseph, and by force they take Joseph to Egypt, sell Joseph in Egypt, where then God blesses Joseph over many years after a long period of being in jail and other things, difficulties, falsely accused. He still blesses Joseph, and Joseph becomes the prime minister, second in power over all of Egypt, which was the world power at that time. And now Joseph is blessed, and now the Pharaoh has a dream. Joseph is given the interpretation to the dream. And now they're able to prepare for 7 years for a famine that was 7 years away, so they would have an abundance through the years of famine. Now, because they were so prepared, all the other people that were dying around the lands and all the other territories are going to Egypt to find salvation, to be saved from the famine. Joseph's brothers come, who would have otherwise been completely and literally extinguished. Joseph is able to save his brothers. The people of Israel, the Jewish nation, saved because of the Ishmaelites. That ought to be a blessing to us today, to realize even our Ishmaelites, our fleshly endeavors, our failings, the things that we've fallen short in, that even when those things happen, God promises still to use those things to bring us to where we need to be and ultimately bring salvation to our family. The Jewish nation would have otherwise been extinguished if it wasn't for Joseph being taken by the Ishmaelites. So sin after sin after sin, what does God promise to do? He promises to work all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. So know this. Maybe you feel that you failed. Maybe that you feel that you have Ishmaelites running around. Maybe literally, maybe not. But maybe you feel like you have those fleshly endeavors, those failings, those things where you fell short, the things where you doubted God, the times that you got ahead of God, the times that you didn't listen to God, the times that you did just flat out dumb, wrong things. God says, I'll take that too. And I'll still use that to bring about blessings in your family. I'll use that. I'll use whatever it is. So no matter what category you find yourself in today, look to God. Let's follow in his footsteps. Amen.